Welcome to the last day of the BFI Film Academy Days at the BFI London Film Festival. My name is Anna Bogutskaya, and I am super pumped to be hosting today's conversation with writer-director Rob Savage, whose film Host became the most talked about horror film of 2020 and was recently crowned the scariest film on the planet by Science. We've got about an hour to talk with Rob about his route from making his first feature film at age 18 to making the scariest film on the planet to now premiering his third feature, Dashcam, at this year's LFF. Rob, how are you doing?
I'm not bad at all. How are you?
I'm great. Where on the planet are you right now? Because I think this is the first question that we need to ask anyone when we're talking
I'm
to
in
Zoom.
I'm in LA at the moment, and it's drizzling with rain. It's very cold, and I've got a half open closet, which is the first rule of horror that I'm breaking. I've got a doll's house with a creepy doll's face, and I've got a crucifix. So keep an eye on the background throughout.
I mean, every single bit about your background is triggering to me personally.
Right?
The minute the crucifix starts moving, I'm sorry, but I'm gonna end this
It's just
conversation.
gonna
Uh,
slowly turn upside down throughout the interview.
like in The Conjuring.
Yeah.
Um, but I wanted to go a little bit back to your starting out in
Yeah,
the
yeah.
industry, which kind of was in many ways the stuff of kind of filmmaking fairy tales, really, right? Kind of writing, directing, shooting, and co-producing, and making your first feature strings so early on at
Yeah.
age 18, getting a BIFA, getting the film released by
Mm.
Vertigo. So how did you deal with all of that at that young age?
Not very well. Like it was an interesting thing because I kind of like I'd made this movie, and made this movie out of complete naivety and complete ignorance, because we had 3 grand, and which I thought was all the money in the world back then, and I didn't really know enough about the film industry. I was growing up in Shropshire in the deep countryside. I'd never been to London. I didn't never met anyone in the film industry. I didn't know that the usual route to making feature films was that you do a whole bunch of shorts first, you get better at your craft, you kind of learn the kind of filmmaker you want to be, and then you make your first feature, and that's like a big deal. I didn't know any of that. I was just like, all the movies I'm watching are 90 minutes, so I'm going to try and make a 90-minute movie. So I made this thing that was just a very kind of low key, art housey, pretentious, like very much the film that a 17-year-old like pretentious art kid would make. And we got very lucky in that it got released just at the time that everyone was like starting to buy DSLR cameras. Like 5Ds, 7Ds were becoming readily available. And the film's okay, the film's fine, but like the story of the film, the fact that this like 17-year-old kid was able to make a movie with readily available digital technology was like kind of heralded as like, oh, the industry's changing. And we kind of rode that wave in a cool way. And the BIFA was amazing, and that really kind of like solidified that that kind of gave me a little foothold in the industry, and I was able to get an agent, and I was able to move to London, and I was able to like uh start developing my next feature. And I really I was like 19 at the time or something like that, and I moved to London. And I was working on this next feature, and I was like, this is easy, this is great. I'm going to have 2 features before I'm 20. This is brilliant. And then the second feature, which again was another like wanky art house movie, was it was about 6 weeks away from shooting. We had the script, we had a great cast, we had a location in Italy, and then just all the money got pulled out, and it all fell apart. And nobody seemed to have an interest in like trying to find any more money for it, and it just went away. And then I was just kind of there with like this like expensive London apartment. I mean, not that expensive, but expensive to me. And like I said, and no way of paying bills, and realizing that actually the industry is really, it's really hard to like to make it in the industry. And it's even harder if you don't know, uh if you kind of don't know who you are as a filmmaker, which is kind of the point of doing all the short films. It's like figuring out how you present yourself, and like what you're, when you go into a room, like what you're selling, and which is
Mm.
kind of the ugly way of saying it. So I really spent like 5 wilderness years doing low budget music videos. I managed to get into commercials, and I made a bit of money there, but I hated it, so I stopped doing that. And then I kind of had to do it back to front. I'd done my feature, and then in those 5 years I had to do a bunch of short films to kind of figure out what I was interested in and what kind of filmmaker I wanted to be, and also to show the industry that I could do other things other than these meandering, like, you know, pretentious 17-year-old art house movies. So, and in that time, I kind of figured that I was going to be the horror guy, and that, you know, I'd lean towards the kind of movie that I like to watch, as opposed to the kind of movie that wins the Palme d'Or, you know.
In retrospect, do you think it benefited you in a way to kind of do it back to front and to start off with such a bang in the industry, like say you know, the big leagues, kind of the place in the industry where words and press and distribution and
Mm.
sales and stuff come into play, which doesn't necessarily work the same way on the short film circuit. And then kind of having those wilderness years. Would you have preferred to do it the traditional route?
No, I think I learned more by thinking I knew it all, and then having all that chipped away over the course of those 5 years. And I think like short films is its own world, and you can
Mm-hmm.
kind of like, you can make short films and they can play a whole bunch of festivals, and it's still kind of like, and you know, unless a short film really kind of breaks big and plays at certain really prestige festivals or gets nominated for a BAFTA, it's still, there's still like a thin membrane that separates the short film world from the features world. and
Mm-hmm.
and then there are kind of gatekeepers, like, you know, like the BFI or Film 4, or like the places that you go to, you know, who, if they're interested in your short, they'll make your feature. And that's kind of like, and I think, you know, I can see there are a lot of people who get lost in just the short film world, and they make incredible shorts and they're better filmmakers than I am, but they're kind of still existing slightly on the periphery of the actual industry. And I think by just landing in the middle of the industry and having to figure it out. I mean, I still feel like an outsider in the industry, but I kind of like, at least learn some of the workings, and I also learned the benefit of just doing something big and splashy. And even if it's rough around the edges, just doing something that makes a bit of noise is kind of a useful thing. Like, I see so many filmmakers who make like amazing, elegant, beautiful work, like short films and television, um, but they don't really get the recognition that they deserve as filmmakers, because um, they make much more low key stuff that
Mm-hmm.
doesn't make as much noise, especially these days when there's so much content bouncing around. You know, I think without strings, like host definitely wouldn't have existed, because I wouldn't have known the benefit of just going out and doing something that sounds a little crazy on paper.
Do you think you can intentionally try to make a splash and actually succeed in making a splash?
No, but I think you've got to just like, you've got to take big swings. You know, I think you've got to take big swings,
Mm.
and you've got to. I think a lot of filmmakers will go into a film project, and they'll know kind of exactly what it's going to be at the other end, and then they'll arrive there, and it'll be beautiful, and
Mm.
it'll be considered, and it'll be great. But I don't think that's the way to do it. I think you've got to go deeper into the water than you're prepared to, you know, than you think you can handle. And it's that kind of instinct which I think ends up with movies that do make a splash and that do
Mm.
make noise.
I wanted to pick you up because you mentioned gatekeepers that kind of come
Mm,
into play when people are trying to break through the from the short film world into the feature
yeah.
film world. And one thing that a lot of gatekeepers use are kind of these markers of success or of, you know, of talent. Like
Mm,
a lot of things that you had very, very early on as well, like the BIFA award, like the Screen
yeah.
Star of Tomorrow,
Mm.
you know, being selected for prestigious talent programs like the Berlinale Talents. Is this something kind of in retrospect and having kind of been a part of a lot of those schemes, what did they add to you as a filmmaker, and do you think it's something kind of people in the audience should be worrying about trying to access?
No, no, I don't think so. Well, I don't. They didn't hurt, and they didn't. They're all kind of. Ultimately, I think they're all kind of useless in terms of like getting. They're not useless, but the thing that's good about them is that they make you
Mhm.
feel like you've got peers and you've got other people to lean on. And I met, you know, like I met, you know, somebody who I've worked with, a producer that I've worked with for years. I met him at the Berlin talents thing that I got on. And that, you know, so you get connections, and you feel a bit more like you've got your footing in the industry. But I think they don't. It's what you do with those things, and it's also just about not like the only thing that matters. The only thing that matters is making the film ultimately. And I think you can do a lot of stuff that dances around making the film, and
Mm-hmm.
you do this talent lab, and you go to this writing retreat, and it's prestigious, and you get to put a little thing in your your uh,
Your Twitter
bio, and
bio.
that, yeah, which reads well. But ultimately, and I did that for 5 years, and that was the thing. Like I was kind of, it was more about every
Mm-hmm.
month I needed that thing that made people kind of like that kept people impressed and made it seem like I was like there was forward momentum, but really there wasn't. It was just I was flatlining for those 5 years for a lot of it. Um, but I think they're useful tools if you see them as such. They're not nothing that you do. Um, like it's never get none of it's going to be done for you, or you're never going to find a scheme which guarantees you the feature or the next step up. It's all about how
Mm-hmm.
you utilize that and um, how you kind of use that to propel yourself onto ultimately doing the thing which matters, which is making your movie.
And kind of on that note, do you think there is a right time for someone aspiring filmmakers to actually start making the films, like waiting for to get on the right scheme, or waiting to get into film school, or waiting to work with a specific collaborator or actor or whatnot? Is there When's the right time for someone to actually start making their first film?
That's a tough one because I think it's very dependent. Like we made Host because
Mm,
there was this window of opportunity that only existed because of this bizarre thing that was going on in the world, and we made it with no stars, and we made it for no money, and it ended up being the best decision we could have made. But that like, if you take away the context, that's an awful idea.
mm,
Like I wouldn't have done that otherwise. um because I think you've got to be really honest with yourself about, is this movie really going, is this just going to get lost in the noise of all these other
mm,
things that are coming out, and there's so much money being thrown around as well. I remember going to Sundance, and this was five years ago, and the film that won, whatever it's called, Back on Blair's movie, uh what it won the top prize at Sundance, and then I flew home a week later, and it was just there, kind of like buried in the Netflix algorithm. Like it was just there, some lost amongst all these other titles, and whatever Tiger King
mhm,
bullshit was the thing that they were pushing at the time. And there's so much stuff. If the film that won Sundance gets lost in that way, you've got to really kind of interrogate if putting your heart and soul and your money into making a low budget feature is really going to be the thing that sets the world on fire. And uh, you, I always tell film students that I would never do what I did now, because the landscape has changed. And
mhm,
we were very lucky that our mediocre film got like hit at this time when there was a conversation happening in the film industry, and that we became central to. And that's not going to happen again unless you make a film in VR and somehow become like part of whatever the next iteration is. But like, what I would say, this is more kind of like to horror filmmakers, is like the, the best way that I can see to like achieving that jump from like being nobody to like suddenly getting lots of eyes on your stuff,
mm,
is to make something that can be viral and can be shared. you know like make something like the David Sandberg, who did Lights Out. He made this
mhm,
2 minute scary, well made horror film with a jump scare at the end that as soon as you see it, you want to send it to your friends and say, watch this, turn the lights out. And he was able within a year to go from that to directing a studio movie. And and Host was the same way. And in a way, we made a stupid viral video, and that ended up getting us the opportunity to make the feature. So that's what I'd say to everyone now, is like, don't make a feature, make something that's going to find viral success online, and then use that to
mhm.
kind of like strong arm your way into making a feature.
And that's kind of a perfect segue to start talking about Host
Mm,
and Dashcam in a way, which are two films that work so make so much sense
mm,
together, and kind of very much both of them tap into the pandemic zeitgeist at their particular moment.
mm,
But I wanted to ask you specifically kind of what it, because they're both found footage
Yeah.
in different ways. So not really horror, but what about the found footage and the kind of the screen life approach to filmmaking attracted you? Because you've now iterated on it twice. And
Yeah.
well, three times if we count the viral video that host
Yeah.
sprung
Yeah.
from.
Um, there was nothing really that attracted me to it in the first place. Like I never thought I never thought I'd make a found footage movie, let alone two. Or maybe, maybe I had the idea that I'd want to do one, but only because I've got this, I've kind of got this desire to tick off all the different subgenres of horror, because I'm, uh, just because I'm such a horror nut. But the thing with Host is we were going after something very specific, and there was this,
Mhm.
that we're doing now, the kind of the Zoom calls that we've become so familiar with. I wanted to, or I thought that the thing that would be like the only thing that would really make Host stand out would be if we could nail the feeling and the authenticity
Mm.
of this, especially back in lockdown when this was all we were doing. And it was more about, I always love finding moments that feel real, or feel unexpected or authentic, and even if I'm shooting in a conventional way, and I love improvisation, I love working with the actors, and to kind
Mm.
of strip away all the mechanics of a normal film production, and to just be shooting like this, like we're talking now, that I kind of like found a way to get really excited about that in the same way that I do when I'm
Mm.
working with actors on a much bigger production. And so host was about just feeling like, if we can make people think, even for a moment, they're on a Zoom call with these guys, uh, then that's a really good opportunity to make
Mm.
something special and of the moment, and that's going to scare the shit out of them. And then with Dashcam, it was really because through the making of Host, uh, I realized how much how much we were able to do with basically no money. Like, we had such a lot of money to make Host, but it all went on screen, and Host felt like much bigger movie than the budget normally would have allowed for. And so and so I just wanted, and now we had a little more money with Blumhouse. If you're shooting found footage on an iPhone, it means again that you can keep that kind of freewheeling improvisational approach, and also you can put the money on screen, which is always what I'm about. Coming from no budget short films, coming from strings and
Mhm.
self shooting, I'm always trying to find a way uh, to just make sure that it's all up there on screen.
And I'll come back to the self-shooting aspect, especially in Dashcam a little bit later. But
Mm,
I wanted to touch on how you work with actors, especially because your host and Dashcam are kind of partly improvised. I
yeah.
think it's safe to say. Like, there's a what's the how do you go? Like, what is a? I don't imagine there's a traditional script. So how do you
No.
work with your co-writers, Jet Shepard and Gemma Hurley,
Mm.
and then working with the actors on kind of crafting and finding the authenticity while also
Yeah.
keeping control of the film.
It's cool because I've worked with Jed for a long time, and Gemma, I knew a little bit before she came on to host, and she's just she's just a brilliant addition to the team, and fit right in. And the nice thing about how the nice thing about starting this working relationship with the two of those guys on Host is that Host was so driven by practical concerns that we were able to have really frank conversations at the beginning of it.
Mm-hmm.
So so the first writing Zoom call we got on, I was able to say, look, we're never going to get to a script. I don't want a script. What I need is something that gives me and the cast enough prompts for us to be able to find to find what the scene is beyond what its function is within the plot. So I need us at the end of this week, because we worked on it for a week. I need something that has strong enough structure, so I know that the purpose of the scene is to explain that the curse is this, and that the way to defeat the demon is this. That practical stuff that the audience needs to know, and that we need to move the plot forward. I need all that ironed out in bullet point form, and then I need us to think of enough fun kind of prompts that then I can find I can find the thing that makes the scene a scene and makes a scene fun, like I can work that out with the actors. So it was really about kind of creating opportunities. Like we knew that the document that we were going to end up with wasn't the finished thing. It was more like a springboard for me and the cast. And that was what was really scary and really exciting about doing Host. And you know, I wouldn't have been able to do it, I think, if I hadn't worked with a lot of those guys before, because we were placing so much trust in them. And I just, it was never really a thing, because I knew that they'd be able to, that they'd be able to do it, and that we'd figure something out, and because they know how I like to work, which is that I just like to keep doing it until we get it right, until we find something that catches fire. Like they would be up for, they'd be up for keeping at it until we got something really cool.
And was there anything that from that process, especially during the making of Host, that you took on or built upon in the making of Dashcam?
Yeah, I think the main thing, and the reason that we kind of lent so far into it with Dashcam, because at the end of the process of making Host, the thing, you know, every time I watch it, the thing that I love the most is that I feel like the personality of all of the cast is like so, it's like scorched into the DNA of that film, and it's why I love it so much, and it's why, you know, I think it's why the film works so well, is because it feels, the personality of that film is the personality of the cast. And with Dashcam, where we've got a really big personality, there was a version of that existed, because Dashcam was a project that existed pre-Host, where the idea was to kind of take the setup, and maybe cast an actor to play the main part, or to try and bring Annie, who's the lead of Dashcam, into a more conventional space. But after Host, I was like, okay, well, the thing I love about Host is that the personality of the girls coming through. So the more interesting version of Dashcam is the one where the film takes on this manic personality of the main character, and we just dial it up and see what that gives us. And it's fun, because you're not trying to, you're using the tools that these great actors or personalities have readily available, and you're letting that kind of feed your own creativity.
How do you create that space with your actors when you're giving them essentially bullet points, and you're kind of taking bits of their personality and amplifying them into a fictionalized version of themselves? How do you create that space where they feel like safe, and that they're not exposing too much of themselves, and that they, you know, that you can keep pushing them and get something really really scary and entertaining
Yeah.
for people to watch?
Well, on Host, what I did is you know, what I try and do, if you've got the time on these films, is to sit and chat with the actors a lot beforehand, and not do, like, I'm not very good at doing rehearsals or anything like that. I'm not like, I don't do workshops, or you know, we don't roll around on the floor or anything like that. Like but I just like to talk, and like, you know, we on Host, we had the 5 days before we started shooting, I spent a day with each of the girls, just going through the blocking. So when you say this thing, you want to be here, you want to move the camera, you want to frame in the creepy closet, you want to do all these kind of things, and then I set their lighting and all this kind of, all the practical stuff, but also just talking character stuff, talking about what we kind of never really talked about, you're playing a version of yourself. It was kind of, it was there in the air, but I think, you know, I didn't want to, it's kind of like slightly, it reduces their contribution to say they're just playing themselves, because they're leaning on their own kind of natural reactions to things, and their kind of natural group dynamic, because we're improvising, but they all had a very specific thing to do within the narrative, and they're very kind of they kind of took authorship of their characters and the way that the story progresses, and, you know, as much as anyone in the movie. And that was really the thing, is you know, so I did these 5 days, and then the final, on the Friday, I got them all together, and we did a kind of non-acting walkthrough of the film, where they didn't act, they just, like, because some of the scenes they didn't know what was going to happen, we were keeping certain aspects of the plot away from them, but just walked through the whole thing so we could do the lighting changes, the camera angles, all of that kind of stuff, so that they wouldn't have to be thinking about the practical stuff. They could just be in this acting space. The rest of it kind of became second nature to them because they were having to be cinematographer, because they were having to light, because they were having to do the sound and all that kind of stuff. Once we got all that out of the way, and partly because they were taking on these other roles and because they felt maybe more involved in the nitty gritty of the filmmaking process, it was great because every day I was able to come on and be like, here are some ideas, play with this. But really I was able to come and say, this is the experience we want the audience to have. Like, we want there to be a real tension. Like, when's this argument going to break out between Gemma and Haley? It's, we know it's coming, but we want to string the audience along and play that tension as much as possible. How can we do that? And then, Radina would be like, oh, well, maybe we can try and change the subject. And we go, yeah, great, let's try that. And it was nice because, you're able to, I'm not very good at speaking like actor language, but I'm good at speaking I'm good at speaking story. And it's like, so the way that, the way that I try and talk to actors is just as storytellers. Like, they're just the same as I talk to a cinematographer. Like, they're a person who has a skill set way beyond what I understand. And so if I'm able to say, like, this is the experience we want the audience to have, I want this feeling, when I between a take, when I'm watching on the monitor, I wasn't quite feeling this, and I think we need that, so it's really just kind of treating them as collaborators in the truest sense, rather than like, I don't know, just bringing everything back to story, bringing everything back to the audience experience. That's been, I've had the most luck and the most success that way.
Welcome back to Vanguard, the internet's #1 live improvised music show podcast from a moving vehicle, where tonight we have so much excitement. It's coming out my ears, it's coming out my rear. Actually, it was coming out of her rear.
So I want to move into Dashcam fully, which by the time this recording is released, will have premiered at LFF already. But you mentioned that some of the things that the way that Host started was taking into account the practical considerations, because we were in the middle of the first lockdown in the UK when you made it. So how did you approach Dashcam? Was it also kind of thinking about the practical challenges, or was there something specific that that you had to keep in mind that then inform the way that you made the film?
I mean, the main thing with Dashcam is that I wanted it to feel, it was aiming at a totally different kind of horror than Host. It was more of a kind of splat stick, Sam Raimi, everything dialed up, very over the top, kind of roller coaster ride thing we were going for. So the kind of the language of it became the thing that took the most work, and I think was, it's the main difference in the identity of the films. When you think of Host, you think of the girls' faces, because that's really what most of the movie is it's this gallery of faces. And with Host, we always had these 7 screens to cut between, so the language of the editing was very unique to that movie. Whereas on Dashcam, the setup is that it's a live stream. It's all happening over this one night. It's a single camera thing, so it became more about the questions like why are they still filming, became more of a question, which is always the thing in fan footage, and we're lucky that the flashlight is attached to our phone, which is which gives us a reason to film when you're wandering around dark forests. But that means that then there's a lot more point of view employed in the movie. It means that a lot of the technical concerns become about finding hidden cut points when you're trying to make a piece of action feel continuous. And then the way that the edit is constructed and how you play, Host was real time, whereas this takes place over a weekend. So how do we kind of utilize those time jumps? And so it became its own. It's it's a found footage movie, but it's really its own language. And then within that, it's about making sure that you know, when you're putting this money on screen, that it really lands, and you're shooting, you know, even though you're shooting it on an iPhone with an iPhone torch, that you're getting the full benefit of some of the stunts and the special effects that you're working with. So it, you know, it was totally, when it was me and Amma and Annie, and you know, me and the cast, that felt pretty much like Host. We were able to move, you know, we're able to move around. The energy is different when you're in the room, but like that approach carried over really easily. But in terms of shooting the scares, shooting the, you know, shooting a lot of the location stuff, it was really, we had to find a totally new approach.
Can you talk a little bit about why found footage? Like, what are some of the freedoms that that particular subgenre offers to you that you wanted to keep on exploring in the second film?
I think mostly because that means that I can have my hands on the camera, and it means because I don't have, you know, I'm impatient and I don't want to wait around for lights to be set up and for a camera crane to go, you know, whatever bit of equipment we, you know, because I can get really into that. I can get into my David Fincher place, and I can be all, you know, perfectionist about making sure there's no bumps on the dolly track and all this kind of nonsense. But it sometimes gets in the way of the storytelling concerns, or just like, you know, what's the experience the audience is going to be having. Are they going to care if there's a bump in the dolly track? Probably not. But it's so fan footage kind of allows more time for play, for one. You know, so you can try, and you know, you're especially if you're working from an outline, which is what we were doing. Again, we had a 20-page or whatever it was bullet point outline, just like Host. It allows more time for play, and it also means that if something's not working, it's easier for you as the director to call it and be like, oh well, let's try something else then. You know, if you're set up over here and trying something and none of it's working, you can be like, oh well, let's run into the woods and try and do it there. Maybe that'll be better. And it's as easy as picking up the iPhone and going and running in there. And it's, you know, and it's also more fun. It's, you know, it's especially fun when you're working with the cast. Like there's a scene in Dashcam when a big like bombshell bit of backstory information is given to one of the characters, and in the script it's like you know, she stops and she's stunned and her eyes go wide and tears form, and it's like meant to be a big dramatic moment. And we'd been making it, you know, in a large part kind of chronologically, and we got to that point, and it felt like that wasn't the movie anymore. And we tried a few takes of it being dramatic, and it just wasn't working. And then on one take, Annie tripped over and fell and started having a laughing fit because she'd twisted her ankle and was just like laughing on the floor. And we kind of, and you know, and the camera just follows her, and the light is on the camera, so we keep rolling, and it became this really fun, lovely scene where the character is given this crazy information, and the only thing she can do is like start giggling because it's so fucking stupid and intense. And like that, you know, you can roll with things like that rather than being like, oh, she's fallen out of this shot that we've constructed with all of our flags and all of our light. I guess we can go with that, but it's going to take 20 minutes to reposition the camera and then replicate that thing that you just did spontaneously. It's a different energy.
And so then how do you, and again, this is kind of a big question. And when I was looking at kind of the credits for Dashcam afterwards, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's no cinematographer credited, is there? Like, how do you shoot, and how do you, how much of the film do you start off kind of wanting specific shots made and kind of knowing exactly what you want, and then kind of letting your David Fincher fly out, and at the same time, how much of it becomes letting shots come out naturally, especially when the actors themselves are handling the camera, in this case kind of being either iPhones or having kind of something on their head, so they're filming from POV shots.
I mean, most of it, the film's kind of like, there's kind of two different approaches that happen in the film. There's the looser, more improvisational stuff, which is more kind of cast based, which you know, a lot of time they're operating the camera, and we're shooting a lot of stuff with an eye to kind of like collect moments, and we're going to jump cut it together, and that's kind of like one editing approach as well. And then there's the stuff that's meant to play continuous, you know, when we've got special effects, or we've got gore effects or anything like that, where you've got to be very specific with the ins and outs. You know, a piece of action which takes place for a minute on screen will be made up of 30 shots, and every single one of those shots needs the perfect in and out, and it needs to feel continuous, and it doesn't need to feel like, you know, you don't want it to feel like Rope, the Alfred Hitchcock film, where every time you have a cut, it goes behind someone's back for 10 seconds. Like, I wanted all of those hidden cuts to be very invisible. So, you know, you're trying to kind of keep that feeling of spontaneity that happens when you just give the camera to an actor, but also there are technical concerns within that. You know, you're trying to keep the language consistent, and then yeah, some of it, that, you know, the last 20 minutes of the movie is all point of view. So that's an actor with this big kind of head rig, crawling around, having to whip their head, you know, to get a whip pan that will cut it into the next shot, and do all this kind of crazy stuff. So it felt like making two movies, basically.
And I also kind of wanted to ask you about, you've mentioned it a couple of times, the language of the live stream. Because for anyone who hasn't seen Dashcam yet, the whole premise is that it's the lead character, Annie, has this kind of live stream show that she does from her car, and a big chunk of the movie is essentially the live stream that she would be doing, and then stuff starts happening, and we'll leave the plot at that. But how do you then develop the language of the live stream, which is a great premise for a found footage horror, but then there's so many things that happen whenever you log on to a live stream. There's all these comments happening that are constantly on the screen. There's stuff that kind of lets you know whether the events are live or live streaming or not live streaming. Like, how do you then also work in, as you're directing and getting everything that you need visually, all of this additional stuff that will need to be on screen to be cohesive with the language of the film?
We had a kind of, you know, like on Host, where we were you know, we were shooting. We had everyone together on Zoom, but we got everyone to take their iPhone and tape it behind the laptop. So we were actually filming on the phone, and that was the footage we used, and then we put it together into the grid, you know, and we kind of built our own Zoom interface. In the same way, on Dashcam, we built this rig that allowed us to have two iPhones, so that's on a stick like this, basically. So it was one iPhone facing out filming, and then the other iPhone facing back at Annie or Amma or whoever had the camera with I can't remember, we were on like Periscope or something like that, like actually broadcasting live. So me and Doug and whoever else was there on the set not doing anything would be commenting in for Annie to react to. So we had the comments going live. You know, and sometimes there were really key comments that we wanted her to vocalize, and sometimes it was just like a bit of levity that she'd pick up on or she wouldn't pick up on, but we'd have that running throughout most of the scenes. Sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't because of the internet signal, but it meant that we were able to kind of like keep a bit of a dialogue between her and the audience. And then it was just about finding the look of the live stream, because it's you know, Dashcam's like a cartoon, you know, it's like it's not like Host, like it's not going for realism, really. You know, it's the live stream feed. We're not aping a specific live stream feed, we had to create our own. So it was more just about aesthetically what was working, and also just giving the audience like different ways to watch the movie. Like, there, you know, even during the scariest scenes, there are people who are not taking it seriously, and if you're reading the comments rather than watching the screen, you're going to have a very different experience. And we had a lot of fun with Easter eggs on Host, and there's lots of kind of Easter eggy stuff in the comments. There are people like armchair investigators, like solving, because the thing about Dashcam as well is like Annie's not interested in what's going on, and so there's lots of stuff that happens in the movie that she's just not interested in kind of like exploring, but the people who are watching they're researching and they're sharing theories, and they kind of crack the case quicker than Annie does. So there's lots of these little details in the comments that are kind of fun for the audience to find on a rewatch.
I was about to say there's at least like I think it's a film that really benefits from rewatching because I did find myself going like focusing either on the comments at times or on the action in the film.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you kind of that commentary, that live running hundreds, if not thousands of lines of comments, where did that also come from you and the team? Or was that all part of the script, so to speak?
No, it was that was we got a few of the crew members to watch an early cut of the movie, and I gave them characters. Somebody's going to be an Annie fanatic, somebody's going to be liberal, somebody's going to be here just to troll. And then they fed in comments, and we got we got in a few kind of different voices, friends of ours who hadn't seen the film, who we knew would have very like specific reactions to Annie and some of the content in the movie, and we got them to comment. And then I just was constantly, every time I had free time, going in and doing passes and having these arguments with myself. And then once we had all these comments together, Doug put them into this like master spreadsheet and assigned them all avatars, and assigned, oh, well, this guy is going to be our bleeding heart liberal, so I'm going to track all of the liberal comments and give them to him. And he made sure that everyone had an arc, or that the person that's disbelieving at the beginning comes around at the end and is a true believer by the end. And it was his job to just keep that all in his head, which is something that I'm incapable of doing.
And you mentioned Doug several times, who's your producer, Douglas Cox. And I'm kind of wondering, because one of the kind of the key things of the story that I really love, from the success of Host to now making Dashcam with Blumhouse, is kind of that the core team has stuck together. Yeah. And I wanted to ask you, because that's one of the things that often comes up in film school or film academies, or these schemes that young filmmakers get onto, is this thing of kind of finding your team or your collaborators. So like, what's important for you from your collaborators? Like, what are you looking from them, and what do you think it's important for you to give them as a director?
They've just got to really care. They've got to really care about what they're doing. And it's like that sounds obvious, and it sounds like you're going to find a lot of people who really truly care, but I don't think it is. I think it's really rare to find people who really care about their craft and will care about the movie as almost as much as you do. And like, when I make one of these movies, I'll push myself until until I'm almost broken, and I want people, I don't want people to match me, but I want people to care, almost as much. And like, Doug absolutely matches that blow for blow, and I think even more so, especially on Dashcam. But it's just it's kind of silly to me that people think that people don't take their collaborators with them, because they make the movie same as you. It's like, Host and Dashcam were improvised movies where everyone was pitching in ideas, the cast was pitching in ideas, that the stunt team were pitching in ideas, that one of the best scares in the movie came from like a production runner or something. Like it's really just like, and I said this a bunch on Host, but like, especially when you're making movies like this, and you're kind of you're making them so fast, and you're making them without a script, and you're improvising them and shooting them on iPhone, it really kind of like lays bare the fact, like, just how kind of bullshitty the idea of like the director as the author of the film, as the solo author of the film. Like, these movies are made by the whole team, and if you take those people away, it's going to be a lot weaker for it. So there's this kind of like NFTS idea of like the writer director Otto, who's going to go and like suffer in his bedroom while he types away a script, and like every word has to come from his very soul and being. And like, that doesn't work for me. I'd much rather get everyone on a call and be like, how can we make the coolest movie? So I'm just fucking myself if I don't work with these guys again, because they're great.
And I wanted to ask you as well, kind of in that jump from Host, which was kind of came out of nowhere in a way, in the middle of last year, even though Dashcam had been an idea kind of before the making of Host, when you actually started, you got the green light from Blumhouse as well and started making it, Did anything change for you and the team, kind of knowing that there was a certain new level of expectations? Like, is this going to be, people wanting more of hosts, but also something different from you and from the people who were making the film as well? Did that affect your process in any way?
Not really, because I've kind of felt like these kind of, both of these films kind of feel like freebies. It feels like we the way that we're making them, and the kind of the whole approach. It's so much about just trying stuff out. Like the host only worked because we just dived into it and we were like, we'll figure this out as we're going. The train's already left the station and we're building the track. Like Wallace and Gromit, we're building the track in front of ourselves, and like. And so it was just, that was the only thing we had to be true to, is to just dive in and be like, this feels exciting. This makes me want to get up in the morning and go and figure it out. And if it doesn't work, and there's stuff about Dashcam which doesn't work as well for me as in host, and there's stuff in host that I watch and I think, oh, I could have done that better. But because of the approach, that's all tied in with the approach. And if the approach changed, then the DNA of the movies would be totally different. So it was never really about thinking what the audience would, and it was partly on Dashcam. It was partly even just like pushing back against that and wanting to make a movie that would alienate a bunch of people who liked host, or just not alienate them, but just to kind of like shake off anyone who would want us to make host 10 times in a row, and make a movie that would say like, we're going to try something else out, and you can follow along, and you don't even have to like it, but we're just going to keep doing things that we think are interesting. Because I think it'd just be such a mistake to try and replicate host, because it was such a specific thing. And when you're making movies for, Dashcam had more money than host, but it's still like a crazy low budget movie. And when you're working on low budget movies like that, when you've got the creative control that, luckily Blumhouse, gave to us, you don't want to play it safe. You want to do something that, you want to play it safe when you've got millions and millions riding on you and everyone's breathing down your neck. But on these movies, you want to just try shit out,
And what was and I'm kind of I'm talking kind of practical wise, so kind of in terms of the actual filmmaking, was there anything about Dashcam that you really want to try out and be like, I just want to see if I can do this shot or this scene or something. Let's see if it works out, kind of without giving away if it's a particularly intense scene in the film, kind of without giving away what it is in the narrative, if that makes sense.
I guess I've always wanted to try and do like a long continuous piece of action, like a kind of like with, I think maybe like 5 years ago, I definitely had the aspiration to do like a kind of True Detective steady cam fucking one shot thing, because I was in that kind of pretentious director place. And now I don't care so much about that, because so often now I see those big long steady cam shots and I just think they're really boring. And I think that actually if they'd have edited them, they'd be much tighter and much, the audience would be having a much better time. But this was kind of like in the context of this movie, it doesn't make sense to have a cut. And if you do cut, then you're showing your hand as the author, and you're letting the audience, like, every time you edit in a fan footage movie, the audience lets out a sigh of relief, because they're like, oh, someone's controlling this. So I knew that there needed to be these long portions of the film that played like single takes. And there's one towards the middle of the movie where stuff starts getting really dark, and we've got a couple of really intense, dangerous stunts that's like a 20-minute long, or it's like cut together to be like a 20-minute long bit of action. And I was proud of that. And that was fun. And I think it paces out well, like watching it with an audience with Tiff and at the premiere, it didn't feel like it was it doesn't feel show offy. I hope it feels like the audience felt like they were kind of like they were in lockstep with the character. And it did that, that's kind of what you want from those long Steadicam shots, is you want the audience to feel like they don't have an opportunity to breathe.
And I'm conscious that we're running out of time, and I find it really funny that you mentioned kind of your past pretentious filmmaker self quite a bit. What changed? Like, what made you kind of leave behind certain pretensions and embrace a different approach to making your work now?
I think host had a large part in it, and I think also working with Sam Raimi had a big part in it. I'm developing a movie with Sam Raimi, and his whole, his whole thing is like, are you doing this for you as the pretentious filmmaker? Or are you doing this for the audience? And every single decision always has to come down to that. He does. We've got this script we've been developing, and he doesn't sit and read a script and make notes. Instead, what you do is you get on a Zoom call with him, or you get in a meeting room with a bunch of people, and you do a table read of the script, and he'll stop, he'll put up his hand and be like, Rob, what do you want the audience to feel in this moment? Like, where's the audience? Who are they relating to? And he, you always have to have an answer for that when you're working with Sam. And it really, on host, that was me trying to put it into practice. And that was the question, like I said, I turn up with the cast and I'd say, what's the experience we want the audience to have here every moment? And I feel like if you always kind of interrogate yourself by that standard, you can't really go wrong, or at least you can kind of, that if you're doing something if you're doing some technical thing, or you're doing some shot that you think is really cool, if it's more for you or the Guardian critic who's gonna think you're clever, then maybe rethink it, and maybe there's a simpler way to attack something that's going to allow the audience to emotionally invest a bit more. So and I'm like, it's a constantly, it's like a push pull thing and a work in progress, but it's definitely something that, like, I try and always come at it with that approach.
And I'm conscious that perhaps kind of the BFI Film Academy audience might be taking part in kind of some film courses or sessions as part of these couple of days of programming, or the year-round activities that the BFI Film Academy do. Is there anything that you wish you would have known when you were kind of in those spaces, kind of learning and having some access to people from the industry, like questions that you wish you would have asked, or kind of a certain change of approach, like for someone who might be finding themselves in these rooms and listening to these conversations for the first time in their life? What do you wish they knew kind of when they're starting out that that you can see now a bit more clearly in retrospect?
I think the big opportunity is to find collaborators, like to find other like-minded people. And like I said, I grew up in the countryside with nobody else who wanted to make films, and every time I was making a movie I had to be dragging people to the set to help me out. And so to have a space where you got people who all want to make movies coming together, you can find people who have shared tastes. And I think if you really click with people over this course, like, hold on to them again, and it's always it's always less, the industry is really, really daunting, and to be working alongside people who are at the same stage as you, like, it's and progressing together, there's a whole, like, I found it really beautiful and heartening that, like, a lot of the people that I came up with, people like Rose Glass and Prano Bailey Bond, like, they're all making these amazing features. And I've known these guys for years and years, and you can have that same experience with people you meet now, and it really makes you feel like you're not kind of figuring out the industry alone, which is a huge thing. I think also, like, really try and figure out the filmmaker you want to be, and not and try and look at it from the point of view of what would I like to watch, rather than what's going to win me accolades. Because I think a lot of people fall into this trap of, like, I'm going to make a film about, I'm some fucking, 16-year-old kid who's you know with and this is totally not my life experience, but I'm going to make a film about euthanasia because that's going to win me an award. You know, like don't look at yourself from that kind of outside perspective. Don't imagine yourself on the, you know, on the red carpet at Cannes and work backwards from there. Like work from a place of like what's exciting for you to make. What kind of films do you watch? You know, I started out very much thinking I was going to be Krzysztof Kieslowski, and then like, you know, but all I was watching, you know, at the time was John Carpenter, and like there was a disconnect that I had to kind of like iron out. So and use the short films that you're making at this stage to figure that out. Like try stuff out, and also just keep these connections alive as well. You know, the BFI. I used to teach at the BFI and the BFI Film Academy, and it was great when there were students who would keep in touch, and they'd say, you know, I've got this great short film idea, and here's this script I've come up with. Would it be okay if we borrowed one of the BFI's cameras to go and shoot it, because I've got no money? And then, you know, we'd figure something out. And like the BFI and the Film Academy is like that connection lasts longer than just the week of LFF or however long the course is. And the same with any speakers who come in as well. Like if you do it in the right way, if you email, you know, if anyone wants to email me and say, you know, I love, you know, I want to hear about how you made Host. Can I buy you a coffee? Like, you know, we're not immune to flattery, and I'll always let somebody buy me a coffee. So like, if you're respectful of people's time, you can make connections that way. It's not the kind of divide isn't as big as you think, and people are always on hand for advice, because it wasn't long ago that we were in the same position that you guys were.
And it's not impossible to contact people as well, if you contact people in the right way and for the right reasons. But as we wrap up this conversation, Rob, I wanted to ask you kind of, do you think you'll stay in horror after Dashcam? Yeah, definitely, because, you know, and I say this a lot, but like you can do anything in horror. Horror is like when you're making a horror movie, you're basically like signing this contract with the audience, being like, I'm gonna scare you, I'm gonna disturb you. That's what you're here for. But the rest of the movie, you know, that's maybe 40% of the movie, but the 60%, that's all mine. And I'm gonna do something interesting, and I'm gonna do something dark, and I'm gonna do something that usually you wouldn't pay money to come and see. You know, I always think of Hereditary, you know, and I watched Hereditary in Bexley Heath Cineworld in a packed audience of people who are jumping and screaming. But the scene that I really remember is the scene at the dinner table, which is straight out of like, you know, it's like an amped up Bergman movie or something, this kind of portrait of grief and dysfunction. And if you took out the demons and the decapitation, nobody in this cinema would be there watching something as intense and something as kind of grueling. But because it's a horror movie, you kind of like entice people in with the horror, but you can kind of do whatever you want with the rest of it. Like, I'm doing a movie, we did this short film called Dawn of the Deaf, which is, you know, set amongst the deaf community, and then there's an infection which is spread through sound, which turns all of the hearing population into ravenous zombies. And like, you know, I've got deaf family members, and I've always wanted to do something about the deaf community, but I'd never be able to get a movie, you know, I'd never be able to get a movie made about that's just a drama set within the deaf community. Or if I was, I'm not the person to make it, but I'm interested in exploring that. And so you throw zombies into the mix, and people come for the zombies, but they're going to come away with some, you know, hopefully some insight into, you know, group of people that they wouldn't normally be exposed to. And you can do that within horror. You can't do that within any other genre. So horror is kind of like having your cake and eating it. Yeah, horror is like the perfect genre to Trojan horse some drama or some good messages through it. Exactly. Rob, I think we've run out of time now, but thank you so much for your candor and the swearing and the generosity in talking about your film so far. I really encourage people to check out Dashcam. There is a second screening at LFF happening tonight at 6 p.m. at BFI South Bank, and I guarantee it's going to be a great one to watch with the crowd. And that's all for us, but I hope everyone's had a great festival and has seen some inspiring films.